Imagination, the power that runs the world. The firing of neurons in the brain creates major epiphanies leading to the greatest things ever to happen in human history. Jonah Lehrer Imagine covers topics from Bob Dylan's songwriting process to the rewriting of Toy Story 3. Imagine is about how creativity in the human brain works. It's a collection of short stories all related to the central topic of creativity, namely, how to be better at it. Lehrer describes how cities are creative hubs due to close proximity. He describes how an everyday conversation can trigger groundbreaking discoveries. He explains the perfect makeup of a group of people to have the most inventive output. Imagine explains how humans ever created anything at all.
Since the dawn of human time, the brain is used every second of every day, whether you know it or not. The process of creativity begins from infancy, from trying to problem solve the square block through the triangle hole to crying incessantly to get what one desires. Creativity is then fostered throughout early education to construct a basis for an inventive mind. It's then used throughout the rest of one's education and into the working world. The issues presented in the book manifest themselves in the office, at school, at home, and worldwide. One can't measure creativity per se, but Jonah Lehrer brings in a host of people to prove his point that not all great minds think alike, proven by his subtle choice of words in passages such as page 11. Reflect for a moment on your own thought process as you try to solve this puzzle. And on page 64, where a type of mind is distinguished between two archetypes of creativity. The author depends on observation to prove his points. He watches creative output, or number of inventions, and profits from various companies, geographic areas, and types of people. Illustrated by a graph on page 126, creativity declines after the age of 30, unless the individual travels, meets new people, or changes career. On page 143, a chart is shown to demonstrate the ideal Q, as Northwestern sociologist Brian Uzi calls it. Q is the social intimacy between a group of people working on a project. Picture 1 shows a low Q, where the group is not familiar enough to create good ideas. The picture on the right shows high Q, where the group of members are too similar to each other to innovate well. The center picture shows an ideal Q, where the highest creative output will be reached. On page 210, a graph is shown where on the left, creativity per capita in a large city is greater than creativity per capita of a small town. On the right, the opposite correlation is shown for businesses, favoring small business as the higher inventor. Lehrer truly illustrates how outside factors and the ideas of different people can affect invention. Jonah Lehrer uses minimal scientific language, making it a fairly easy read for the general public. Much of the book is quotes from professionals in an engineering, neuroscience, or sociology field. However, a portion is made up of quotes from farmers, children, and musicians. Hence, the type of language is varied greatly. A simpler quote is from Lehner's piece on Bob Dylan, with Dylan himself stating, "I was playing a lot of songs I didn't want to play. I was singing words I didn't want to sing. It's very tiring having other people tell you how much they dig you if you yourself don't dig you." A more complex quote comes from page 65. The Apollonian artist, by comparison, relies on convergent thinking. This mode of thought is all about analysis and attention. It's the ideal approach when trying to refine a poem, or solve an algebra equation, or perfect a symphony. In these instances, we don't want a lot of stray associations, such as thoughts of errant distractions. Instead, we want to focus on the necessary information, filling out minds with relevant thoughts. And so we slowly converge onto the ideal answer, chiseling away at our errors. The process is a struggle, a long labor of attention, but that's the point. It takes time to find the perfect line. The long-term effects of a more creative world are all positive, as one would expect. It would give us cures for disease, new technology, fix economic problems, and solve world hunger, along with a multitude of smaller-scale innovations. The question is, how do we achieve this kind of world? Well, Lehner's answer is simple. More small talk, more breaks, and generally, be more human. Small talk. It's believed to be so important to the creative process that the head building of operations of Pixar Animations put a coffee shop, conference rooms, and its only bathroom in the center of the building so that its employees would be forced to engage in conversation with one another, going so far as to enforce a rule that one must meet a minimum small talk quota in a given amount of time. The positive effect of more breaks has been proven through researches that were discussed in the book. One particular study conducted by Ulrich Wagner and Jan Born came up with the evidence that when people were left to their own devices, less than 20% of them found a shortcut to the brain teaser given, even when given several hours to mull over the task. The act of dreaming, however, changed everything. After people were allowed to lapse into REM sleep, nearly 60% of them were able to discover the secret pattern. Kierkegaard was right. Sleeping is the height of genius. On the topic of simply being more human, Lehrer wrote about an improv comedy class where being human was strongly encouraged, although it's better explained by a quote from page 102. The ability to not care what others think is one of the fundamentals of Second City. A typical class begins with playing a few children's games such as Duck Duck Goose or Simon Says or Zip Zap Zop. After that, the students move on to conducted rants, screaming at the top of their lungs about something that makes them angry. Finally, they arrange folding chairs in a circle and engage in what's known as 5 minutes of therapy. The goal is to get confessional as quickly as possible, to share secret thoughts and repressed feelings. The stories felt raw and unfiltered, and that's the point. The ideas presented in Imagine are not necessarily controversial, although some of them are relatively new. Some of the practices suggested to improve one's imagination could be uncomfortable for some. He claims that simple exchanges on the streets with strangers could trigger great ideas, similar to Pixar's philosophy of small talk. If someone is willing to push the societal boundaries in order to help develop their ideas, the next great epiphany that can change the world could happen. The content of Imagine may not directly relate to fixated math or social studies skills or topics required for a ninth grader to learn, but the book brings up important points about using one's mind outside the education system's desired ways for students to think. Lehrer spoke about Yo-Yo Ma, who spent his schooling days learning how to play the cello from his father. Ma strove for academic excellence, attending Harvard University by age 16, but his true achievement lies in the extracurricular field. Yo-Yo Ma is, and always will be, known for his cello skills, which goes to show how although a student can have perfect grades, it's their well-roundedness that can open more doors for them. I believe the most significant passage of Imagine was its first one, the story of how tape was invented. A mundane object that's used by the mile every day was invented a short time ago in 1925. A recurring theme in Imagine is the fact that a simple moment can trigger a thought that can change the world. While working for 3M selling sandpaper to automotive companies, Richard Drew watched mechanics paint cars. They would paint the first layer, then use industrial adhesive and glue sheets of paper to the cars to paint racing stripes. Once the stripes dried, they peeled off the paper, and more often than not, peeled off a section of the paint as well. They had to restart the process, sanding down the edges of the bare section. The book states, just consider the invention of masking tape. Drew's fundamental insight was that even a simple product like sandpaper, nothing more than paper coated in adhesive, could have multiple uses. Drew realized that those ingredients could also be turned into a roll of adhesive, page 37. Drew's moment of realization while literally watching paint dry shows that creativity can happen anywhere. Jonah Lehner's Imagine teaches the reader about the importance of thinking. He writes that every creative story is different. Every creative story is the same. There was nothing. Now there's something. It's almost like magic. I believe that the importance of creativity is downplayed by far. Imagine has broadened my perspective upon the world of inventing.
This book is a display of great thinking. Its collection of stories showing the impact of imagination on the modern world were relevant and relatable to many aspects of life. Lehner's manner of telling such stories opens one's mind to a new realm of possibility. Imagine leaves the reader feeling ready to create something amazing. Imagine embodies the spirit of what its title entails.